My name is Caroline Roberts, and I want you to know something before I tell you my story. When Judge Morrison asked me how I pleaded to the murder charges, I looked him straight in the eye and said, I did what I had to do. The gasps that rippled through that courtroom, the shocked faces of the jury, the frantic scribbling of reporters, none of it mattered to me. Because for the first time in 6 months, I felt something other than the hollow ache of betrayal. I felt satisfaction. You might think I'm a monster. By the end of my story, you might think I'm a hero. The truth is, I'm neither. I'm just a woman who trusted the wrong person and paid a price so devastating that revenge became the only language I could speak. But let me start at the beginning, when I still believed in justice, when I still thought that doing the right thing meant something in this world. Picture this: corner office on the 32nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Seattle, awards lining the walls like soldiers in formation. That was my world. Skyline Pharmaceuticals wasn't just my company, it was my life's work, built from nothing but determination and a belief that science could heal the world. I was 38 years old and I had everything. A company valued at $50 million, a treatment that could revolutionize cancer care, and a partnership with the one person I trusted more than anyone, Marcus Vaughan. Marcus was the kind of man who lit up every room he entered. Brilliant, charismatic, with this infectious laugh that made you believe anything was possible. We'd been business partners for 7 years, ever since he joined Skyline as my head of research. But more than that, we were friends. Best friends. The kind who finish each other's sentences and share the same dreams. That particular morning, Marcus burst into my office with his usual energy, a stack of papers in his hand and that megawatt smile plastered across his face. Ready to change the world, Caroline? I was reviewing our licensing agreement with Meridian Healthcare, 12 years of research culminating in a deal worth $200 million. ReemGen, our breakthrough cancer treatment, was about to enter phase 3 trials. Not just change it, Marcus, I laughed, holding up the contract. We're going to save it. 12 years. 12 years I'd poured my soul into developing ReemGen. 60-hour weeks, missed vacations, relationships that crumbled under the weight of my obsession with creating something that mattered. But it was worth it. Every sacrifice was worth it because ReemGen wasn't just another drug, it was hope in a syringe. Marcus placed his hand on my shoulder, and I felt that familiar warmth of knowing someone truly understood your vision. Our treatment, Caroline. We built this together. Our treatment. Those words should have been my first warning, but I was too blinded by trust to see the poison hidden in them. That evening, I went home to my penthouse overlooking Elliott Bay. David Chen, my fiancé, was in the kitchen making his famous stir-fry. David was everything Marcus wasn't: quiet where Marcus was loud, steady where Marcus was electric. A pediatric surgeon with gentle hands and an even gentler heart. He saved children's lives every day while I worked to save adults tomorrow. How did the meeting go? He asked, not looking up from the vegetables he was chopping with surgical precision. Perfect. Tomorrow we sign with Meridian, and then... I paused, letting the magnitude wash over me. Then we save the world. David smiled, that soft smile that made me fall in love with him. And after that, we get married, buy that house in Bellevue you've been eyeing, and maybe think about adding some little voices to this quiet penthouse. He kissed me then, and I tasted the future on his lips. A future where my work mattered, where we built something beautiful together, where trust wasn't a weapon waiting to be wielded against me. God, how naive I was. The next morning, Meridian Healthcare's boardroom buzzed with the energy of a historic deal. Jonathan Hayes, Meridian's CEO, was a silver-haired man who commanded respect through presence alone. His legal team flanked him like generals preparing for war, but this was supposed to be a celebration, not a battle. I sat beside Marcus, our lawyers on our left, 12 years of research summarized in the contract before us. ReemGen would be licensed exclusively to Meridian for global distribution. They would handle manufacturing, marketing, and distribution while Skyline retained all research rights and a significant percentage of profits. Ladies and gentlemen, Hayes announced, today we make history. ReemGen represents the future of cancer treatment. I felt Marcus tense beside me. Just slightly, almost imperceptibly, but I knew him well enough to notice. I glanced at him, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Guilt. Regret. But then his practiced smile returned, and I convinced myself I'd imagined it. We signed. Champagne flowed. Photographs were taken. Hayes promised that Reem-Jen would be in hospitals nationwide within 2 years, saving hundreds of thousands of lives. I should have been ecstatic. Instead, I felt a strange unease, like standing on the edge of a cliff without knowing how far the drop was. 3 weeks later, I was working late when I noticed something odd in our research database. Access logs showed unusual activity. Someone had been downloading files at night, files they shouldn't have needed for their work. The user ID belonged to Marcus. I told myself it was nothing. Marcus was dedicated, probably just reviewing data to ensure our Phase 3 protocols were perfect. But the downloads were extensive: entire databases, proprietary formulations, manufacturing processes. Everything. When I confronted him the next morning, Marcus had an explanation ready. "I've been reviewing everything for the FDA submission," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "You know how thorough they are. I want to make sure we're prepared for any questions." It made sense. Marcus was thorough, sometimes to a fault. But something in his voice, a note I'd never heard before, made my chest tighten with unspoken doubt. "Marcus, if you need anything, just ask. We're partners." "Of course, Caroline. You know you can trust me." Trust. The word hung between us like a loaded gun. 2 months after signing with Meridian, I received a call that shattered my world into pieces so small I'm still finding fragments. It was Elena, my sister, calling from her law office in San Francisco. "Caroline, I need you to see something. Can you access the news right now?" I turned on the television in my office, and there he was. Marcus Vaughn, standing beside Jonathan Hayes at a press conference, announcing Meridian's revolutionary new cancer treatment, Regenesis. My blood turned to ice as I watched Marcus explain the breakthrough to reporters. He used my research, my words, even my metaphors to describe how the treatment worked. The only difference was the name, and the complete absence of any mention of Caroline Roberts or Skyline Pharmaceuticals. "We've been developing Regenesis for over a decade," Marcus lied smoothly to the camera. "It represents a quantum leap in cancer treatment, and we're proud to bring hope to millions of patients worldwide." Elena's voice seemed to come from another dimension. "Caroline, are you there? Caroline?" I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I watched my life's work being stolen in real time, broadcasted to the world as Marcus Vaughn's genius. But here's what really broke me, and I want you to think about this as I continue my story. What would you do if someone didn't just steal your work, but stole your very identity? If you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever had someone you trusted turn your love into a weapon against you, let me know in the comments. Because what happened next? Well, it gets so much worse. Don't forget to subscribe for the full story. Trust me, you won't want to miss where this goes. I spent the next week in a haze of disbelief and desperate research. My lawyers, the best intellectual property attorneys money could buy, delivered the devastating truth piece by piece. Marcus had been planning this for over a year. Using his access to our systems, he'd systematically copied every file, every formula, every piece of research that made Reem-Jen possible. But he'd been clever, much cleverer than I'd given him credit for. The downloads were spread over months, never taking enough at once to trigger our security protocols. He'd covered his tracks by accessing files he legitimately needed for his work, making it nearly impossible to prove which downloads were authorized and which were theft. Worse, Marcus had been feeding information to Meridian during our licensing negotiations. While I thought we were partners preparing to change the world, he was actually helping our buyer steal everything we'd worked for. "The contract you signed," my lead attorney, Sarah Martinez, explained with the gentle tone people use to deliver terminal diagnoses, "it's worthless. Meridian never intended to honor it. They were using the negotiations to map our research while Marcus fed them our actual data." "But we have proof," I insisted. 12 years of research logs, patent filings, everything is documented. Sarah's expression grew more pained. "Caroline, that's the most sophisticated part of the theft. Marcus had access to our documentation systems. Over the past year, he's been gradually altering timestamps, changing file properties, even creating backdated research logs that make it appear as though key breakthroughs originated from his independent research rather than our collaborative work. The room spun around me. What are you saying? I'm saying that legally, it will be almost impossible to prove theft. Marcus has constructed a paper trail that suggests he was the primary researcher on ReemGen, and that much of what we consider collaborative work was actually his individual contribution to Skyline. That's insane. ReemGen was my concept from the beginning. I have the original research proposals, all of which show Marcus as a co-developer. Sarah interrupted gently. Caroline, I've seen corporate espionage before, but nothing this methodical. He didn't just steal your research, he stole your history. I confronted Marcus that evening at his downtown apartment. The man who answered the door wasn't the friend I'd known for 7 years. This Marcus was cold, calculating, wearing success like armor. Caroline, he said, not inviting me in. I wondered when you'd show up. How could you do this to me? To us. His laugh was brittle, unfamiliar. Us. Caroline, there never was an us. There was you, taking all the credit, and me, doing half the work for a fraction of the recognition. That's not true. We were partners. I was your employee. A very well-compensated employee, but an employee nonetheless. You owned 60% of Skyline, I owned 15%. You were the face of every presentation, every interview, every award ceremony. When people talked about ReemGen, they talked about Caroline Roberts' breakthrough. Because it was my company, I founded Skyline, I developed the initial concepts. With my research. With my formulations. With my innovations. His voice rose, years of resentment pouring out. Do you have any idea what it's like to watch someone else get credit for your work? To be introduced as Caroline Roberts and her team when you've spent 60-hour weeks making her dreams reality? I stared at him, seeing a stranger. So you decided to steal everything? I decided to take what was mine. Meridian offered me something you never did, recognition. Real partnership. Jonathan Hayes knows my value. This will destroy you, Marcus. When the truth comes out. What truth? He smiled then, cold and triumphant. That the head of research at a pharmaceutical company took his own work when he left. That seems perfectly reasonable to me. It's not your work. Prove it. Those 2 words hit me like physical blows. Because suddenly I understood the depth of his betrayal. This wasn't an impulsive act of greed, this was a calculated assassination of everything I'd built. What followed were 6 months of legal hell that consumed my savings, my energy, and what remained of my faith in justice. My lawyers filed injunctions, patent challenges, and theft charges. Marcus's team, funded by Meridian's deep pockets, countered with documentation that painted me as a credit-stealing CEO who had systematically minimized her head researcher's contributions. The depositions were torture. Sitting across from Marcus as he calmly lied about our partnership, rewriting 7 years of shared history. According to his testimony, he had developed ReemGen's core compounds independently and had graciously allowed Skyline to pursue development in exchange for equity and recognition that I had subsequently denied him. Ms. Roberts was focused on the business side, he testified under oath. The actual scientific breakthroughs came from my lab. I have the documentation to prove it. And he did. Somehow, impossibly, he had documentation. Research logs that showed him working alone on key formulations. Email chains that made it appear as though I was simply providing business oversight while he did the actual development. Patent applications that listed him as the primary inventor. My lawyers worked 18-hour days trying to prove that the evidence was falsified, but Marcus had been too careful. Every alteration was subtle, every backdated document was plausible. He hadn't just stolen my research, he'd stolen my past and rewritten it in his favor. 8 months after the theft was discovered, Judge Patricia Williams delivered the verdict that destroyed what remained of my life. While the court acknowledges that both parties contributed significantly to the development of ReemGen, she announced from her bench, the evidence suggests that Mr. Vaughan's contributions were more substantial than initially recognized by Skyline Pharmaceuticals' corporate structure. Furthermore, Mr. Vaughan's departure and subsequent development of regenesis appears to represent legitimate utilization of his own intellectual property. I felt my soul leave my body. The judge continued speaking about licensing disputes and corporate governance, but I heard none of it. All I heard was the sound of 12 years of my life being legally erased. The injunctions were dissolved. Marcus was free to continue developing regenesis with Meridian. Skyline Pharmaceuticals was ordered to pay court costs, nearly $2 million that I didn't have. As I watched Marcus shake hands with his attorneys, celebrating his victory, I realized that the law, the system I'd believed would protect the innocent and punish the guilty, was just another game that could be manipulated by those clever enough to rewrite the rules. Within a month, everything unraveled. Skyline Pharmaceuticals, drained by legal fees and without its primary asset, filed for bankruptcy. The company I'd built from nothing, the dream I'd sacrificed everything for, died with a stack of papers filed in King County Superior Court. David tried to be supportive, but I could see the doubt growing in his eyes. Not doubt about my innocence, he knew me too well for that, but doubt about the woman I was becoming. The rage that consumed me was changing me in ways that frightened both of us. Maybe it's time to move on, he suggested gently one evening as I obsessed over legal documents for the 100th time. Start something new. We could relocate, maybe move to Portland where my brother practices. Fresh start. Move on. I laughed, but it sounded more like glass breaking. David, they didn't just steal my research. They stole my identity. Every scientist who hears the name Caroline Roberts will associate it with failure, with being outsmarted by her own partner. My reputation is destroyed. Your reputation isn't everything. It's the only thing I have left. That's when I saw it, the moment David began to understand that the woman he'd fallen in love with was disappearing, being consumed by something dark and hungry. Elena tried to help, flying up from San Francisco every weekend, trying to talk me through the anger. But even she couldn't understand. She was a successful attorney with a loving family and a secure future. She'd never had someone reach into her chest and tear out everything that defined her. The breaking point came when I saw Marcus on the cover of Forbes magazine, the genius behind regenesis, how Marcus Vaughan is revolutionizing cancer treatment. I read every word of that article, each sentence twisting the knife deeper. Marcus had given a lengthy interview about his vision for cancer treatment, his years of independent research, and his decision to leave Skyline to pursue his breakthrough with a partner who truly understood his contributions. Caroline Roberts is a talented businesswoman, he was quoted as saying, but she struggled to understand the scientific complexities of what we were developing. I realized I needed a partner who could appreciate the full scope of my work. My talented businesswoman. As if I were some MBA who had stumbled into pharmaceuticals by accident, rather than someone who had spent 2 decades learning chemistry, biology, and pharmacology. That night, I stood in my empty office, the furniture had been repossessed along with everything else, and made a decision that would define the rest of my life. The law had failed me. Justice was a fairy tale told to children who still believed the world was fair. But there was another kind of justice, older and more reliable than any courtroom verdict. Marcus Vaughan had taken everything from me. Now I was going to return the favor. For 3 months, I became someone I didn't recognize. While the world moved on and regenesis moved toward FDA approval, I studied Marcus like a scientist studying a particularly interesting specimen. I learned his routines, his habits, his weaknesses. I discovered that success hadn't made him cautious, if anything, it had made him arrogant. He lived in the same downtown apartment, ate at the same restaurants, maintained the same predictable schedule. More importantly, I learned about his new life at Meridian. The pressure he was under to deliver on the promises he'd made. The company's massive investment in regenesis, the clinical trials that had to succeed, the timeline that left no room for delays or complications. Marcus thought he was safe. He thought that destroying me legally meant he could forget about me entirely. He had no idea that losing everything had freed me in ways he couldn't imagine. When you have nothing left to lose, the world becomes full of possibilities. I started small. Anonymous tips to the FDA about potential data irregularities in regenesis trials. Carefully crafted questions posed by fake journalists about the true origins of the research. Subtle suggestions to former Skyline employees that they might have valuable information about the development process. None of it was illegal. None of it was provably connected to me. But each piece chipped away at the perfect narrative Marcus had constructed. I watched him grow increasingly paranoid as questions multiplied. He hired private investigators to look into the sources of the scrutiny, but I was careful, too careful to be caught by hired professionals. The plan that would ultimately bring me to that courtroom crystallized when I learned about Marcus's greatest fear, that his theft would be exposed before Regenesis received FDA approval. Meridian had invested nearly $500 million in the treatment. If questions about its origins derailed the approval process, or if patent challenges emerged after approval, the company would be financially destroyed. And Marcus, as the architect of the theft, would be legally and professionally annihilated. I spent weeks crafting the perfect trap. A series of anonymous communications to the FDA, each one referencing specific aspects of the original ReMGen research that Marcus couldn't have developed independently. The tips were subtle enough to avoid triggering immediate investigation, but specific enough to raise serious questions about data integrity. The beauty of the plan was its inevitability. Once the FDA began asking questions, Marcus would have to provide documentation. But the documentation he'd created to steal my research wouldn't hold up under genuine scientific scrutiny. The timeline discrepancies, the impossible research progressions, the convenient gaps in experimental data, everything that had been sufficient to fool a civil court would crumble under regulatory review. Marcus would be exposed not just as a thief, but as a fraud who had put hundreds of thousands of cancer patients at risk with a treatment based on stolen and potentially corrupted research. But that wasn't enough. Not anymore. You see, I'd learned something about myself during those months of legal hell. I wasn't the person I thought I was. The Caroline Roberts who had built Skyline Pharmaceuticals was motivated by hope and the desire to heal. But the Caroline Roberts who emerged from that destruction was motivated by something much darker and much more focused. I wanted Marcus to suffer the way I had suffered. I wanted him to lose everything the way I had lost everything. And I wanted him to know, in those final moments, exactly who was taking it all away from him. I arranged to meet Marcus at Pike Place Market on a rainy Thursday evening. I told him I had information about the FDA inquiries, information that could help him protect Regenesis if he was willing to negotiate. He came because arrogance had made him reckless. He believed he'd won so completely that even I couldn't threaten him anymore. We met at a coffee shop overlooking Elliott Bay. Marcus looked successful, confident, wearing a tailored coat that probably cost more than most people made in a month. But I could see the strain around his eyes, the subtle signs of a man under increasing pressure. "You look good, Caroline," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "I heard about David. I'm sorry." David had left me 2 weeks earlier, finally accepting that the woman he'd loved was gone. He'd packed his bags with tears in his eyes, but I'd felt nothing watching him go. The capacity for that kind of love had been cauterized out of me. "Are you?" I asked. "Sorry, I mean. Of course I am. I never wanted personal relationships to be affected by business decisions." Business decisions. I repeated the phrase slowly, tasting its inadequacy. "Is that what you call stealing 12 years of my life?" Marcus's expression hardened. "We've litigated this, Caroline. The court ruled. The court ruled based on lies you spent a year constructing. We both know what really happened. What really happened is that I finally got credit for my contributions. You built a career on other people's work, and when someone finally challenged that, you couldn't handle it." I smiled then, and I saw him flinch slightly. Good. He was beginning to understand that the broken woman he'd left in that courtroom had been replaced by something much more dangerous. "Marcus, do you know what I've been doing for the past 3 months? Hopefully moving on with your life. I've been studying you. Learning about your new world, your new pressures, your new vulnerabilities." I leaned forward slightly. "Did you know that the FDA received 6 anonymous tips about Regenesis last month? All very detailed, all very specific about research methodologies and data integrity." The color drained from his face. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the inevitability of truth, Marcus. You can steal research, you can manipulate courts, you can even rewrite history. But you can't change the fundamental science. And when the FDA starts asking the right questions, your house of cards is going to collapse. You can't prove. I don't need to prove anything. The science will prove itself. When they examine your research timeline, when they ask for original experimental data, when they want to see the progression from hypothesis to breakthrough, what are you going to show them? Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. If you think you can blackmail me. Blackmail? I laughed, genuinely amused. Marcus, you've misunderstood the situation entirely. I'm not here to make a deal with you. I'm here to watch your face when you realize what's about to happen to your life. Sit down, Marcus. There was something in my voice, something cold and final, that made him obey despite himself. 3 days ago, the FDA announced a comprehensive review of Regenesis based on anonymous concerns about data integrity. The review will take approximately 6 months. Meridian's stock price has already dropped 30% in after-hours trading. His face went white. How do you? Because I orchestrated it. Every tip, every question, every doubt that's been raised about your stolen research, that was me. Systematically destroying the foundation you built on my work. You're insane. Am I? Let me tell you what happens next. The FDA investigation will uncover the timeline discrepancies in your research. They'll discover that key breakthroughs supposedly developed over months actually appeared overnight in your documentation. They'll realize that the mathematical progressions in your formulations are impossible unless someone had access to the completed research from day one. Marcus started to speak, but I continued relentlessly. Meridian will realize they've been defrauded. They'll sue you for the $500 million they've invested, plus damages. The SEC will investigate securities fraud. The medical community will blacklist you. And hundreds of thousands of cancer patients will lose access to a treatment that could have saved their lives, all because of your greed. Caroline, please. But that's not the beautiful part, Marcus. The beautiful part is that when it's all over, when you've lost everything and everyone knows you for the thief you are, the original patents will revert to Skyline Pharmaceuticals. To me. I leaned back, savoring the moment. I'll rebuild everything you destroyed. I'll bring Regen to market the way it was meant to be brought to market. And every life it saves, every success story, every medical breakthrough, it will all be associated with the name Caroline Roberts. Your theft will become a footnote, a cautionary tale about corporate espionage. Marcus was shaking now. You can't do this. The damage to the patients. The damage to the patients is your responsibility. You're the one who built this treatment on a foundation of lies. I'm just making sure the truth comes out. There has to be another way. We can work together, fix this. Work together? I stood up, looking down at him. Marcus, you killed the woman who would have worked with you. Caroline Roberts died in that courtroom 8 months ago. I'm just what's left. I walked away from that coffee shop feeling more alive than I had in months. For the first time since the theft, I had a sense of purpose, of direction. Marcus would be destroyed, justice would be served, and I would reclaim everything that had been stolen from me. But Marcus, apparently, had one final move to make. 2 weeks later, I received a call from Elena. Marcus had reached out to her, claiming he had information about my activities that could result in criminal charges. He wanted to meet, to discuss a resolution that would protect both of us. I should have known it was a trap. I should have realized that a man desperate enough to steal 12 years of research was desperate enough for anything. But arrogance had made me careless too. I thought I'd won. I thought Marcus was finished. We met at his apartment. He answered the door looking haggard, defeated. The successful executive from 2 weeks earlier had been replaced by a broken man who clearly hadn't been sleeping. Caroline, thank you for coming. What do you want, Marcus? I want to end this. For both of us. He led me into his living room. The space was different, furniture moved around, new decorations, almost like he was preparing for something. I've been thinking about what you said. About the patients who will suffer because of what I did. You're right. I never considered that. I studied his face, looking for the trap. And I want to make it right. I want to return the research to you, publicly acknowledge what happened, and work with you to bring Regen to market properly. It's too late for that. Maybe not. If we move quickly, if we present a united front to the FDA. Marcus, you don't understand. This isn't about saving Regenesis anymore. This is about justice. That's when I saw it, the slight movement of his hand toward his pocket. The nearly imperceptible tension in his posture. The way his eyes focused just slightly behind me rather than on me. I turned, but it was too late. The man who emerged from Marcus's bedroom was large, professional, and holding a gun with the casual confidence of someone who used such tools regularly. Caroline Roberts, the man asked politely. Yes. Mr. Vaughn has hired me to resolve a business dispute. I looked back at Marcus, finally understanding. You're going to have me killed. I'm going to survive, Marcus replied. You've made it clear that there's no other option. The professional, I never learned his name, gestured for me to sit down. Mr. Vaughn has explained the situation. You've been systematically destroying his business through false communications with regulatory agencies. That's a federal crime. Everything I told the FDA was true. Maybe. But you can't prove that from a grave. I felt remarkably calm. Perhaps because I'd already lost everything that mattered. Perhaps because this seemed like the logical conclusion to a story that had started with one betrayal and would end with another. How are you going to explain my death? Marcus had clearly thought this through. Suicide. Disgraced CEO, destroyed by legal battles and financial ruin. Very believable, unfortunately. Elena will never believe that. Elena will believe what the evidence tells her to believe. And the evidence will show a woman who lost everything and couldn't live with the shame. But here's the thing about desperation, it makes people careless. And Marcus, for all his planning, had made one critical error. He'd underestimated how thoroughly I'd prepared for war. While he'd been arranging my murder, I'd been recording every conversation we'd had. The coffee shop meeting, the phone calls, even this confrontation, all of it captured by devices so small and sophisticated that neither Marcus nor his professional killer had detected them. More importantly, I'd prepared for the possibility that Marcus might try to eliminate me permanently. Elena had detailed instructions about what to do if I disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances. Every piece of evidence I'd gathered, every recording I'd made, every document that proved Marcus's theft, all of it was in her hands, with instructions to release everything to the media and law enforcement if anything happened to me. Marcus, I said calmly, you should know that killing me won't solve your problems. It will create much bigger ones. I don't think you're in a position to make threats. I'm not making threats. I'm explaining consequences. I looked directly at the professional. Do you know what Mr. Vaughn hired you to do? He's asking you to murder someone who has already provided law enforcement with evidence of his corporate crimes. My death won't look like suicide, it will look like a man eliminating a witness. The professional's expression didn't change, but I saw him glance at Marcus with new interest. She's lying, Marcus said quickly. She's desperate. Am I? Marcus, why don't you call Detective Sarah Morgan at Seattle PD and ask her about the evidence package she received yesterday? Or better yet, call your attorney and ask him about the federal prosecutor who's been asking questions about Regenesis. The professional took a step back. Mr. Vaughn, you didn't mention law enforcement involvement. Because there isn't any. She's bluffing. But doubt was creeping into the professional's voice. If she's already talked to the police. She hasn't. I smiled. Marcus, would you like to hear the recording of your confession from 2 weeks ago? The one where you admitted to stealing my research? The color drained from Marcus's face as I reached slowly into my purse and withdrew a small recording device. I pressed play. Marcus's voice filled the room. I decided to take what was mine. Meridian offered me something you never did, recognition. Real partnership. The professional lowered his weapon. Mr. Vaughn, this changes the situation significantly. She manipulated me. I never would have said those things. You said them because they were true, I interrupted. And now they're evidence. What happened next happened quickly, but I remember every detail with crystal clarity. The professional, realizing he'd been hired to commit a murder that would inevitably be traced back to him, made the logical decision to protect himself. He turned the gun on Marcus. "Mr. Vaughn, you've put me in an untenable position. Please, this is all a misunderstanding. You hired me to eliminate a witness who's already provided evidence to law enforcement. That's not a business dispute, that's conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree." I watched Marcus's face cycle through terror, disbelief, and finally, the same desperate rage that had consumed me for months. "You destroyed me first," he screamed at me. "You took everything from me. My reputation, my future, my life's work. Your life's work." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Marcus, your life's work was stealing other people's lives' work." The professional was growing impatient. "Mr. Vaughn, I need to resolve this situation cleanly." That's when Marcus made his final play. In a movement that surprised both of us, he lunged for the gun. What followed was chaos. 3 people struggling in a small space, with a loaded weapon that could go off at any moment. The professional was trained, but Marcus was desperate, and I was driven by 8 months of suppressed rage. The gun went off. Marcus crumpled to the floor, blood spreading across his expensive shirt. The professional and I stood frozen, staring at the man who had set all of this in motion. "Is he dead?" I asked. The professional knelt beside Marcus, checking for a pulse. "Not yet. But soon." I looked down at Marcus Vaughn, the man who had been my best friend, my business partner, and ultimately my destroyer. He was conscious, his eyes wide with fear and pain. "Caroline," he whispered. "Please." "Please what, Marcus?" "Please forgive you. Please save you. Please pretend that none of this happened. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." And for just a moment, looking at this broken, dying man, I almost felt something resembling pity. Almost. But then I remembered David leaving, his eyes full of love and disappointment. I remembered Elena crying as she watched her sister disappear into someone she didn't recognize. I remembered the employees of Skyline Pharmaceuticals losing their jobs because of Marcus's greed. I remembered the cancer patients who would die waiting for a treatment that could have saved them years earlier. "I'm sorry too, Marcus," I said quietly. "I'm sorry that you made me into this." The professional was already moving, preparing to clean up the scene. But I stopped him. "Leave him." If we call paramedics." I said leave him. I knelt beside Marcus, close enough that only he could hear my words. "You wanted to know what it feels like to lose everything? Now you know. But unlike me, you won't get the chance to rebuild." I watched the light fade from his eyes, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no regret, no closure. Just the hollow acknowledgement that justice, when you have to take it for yourself, tastes like ash. The professional, who I later learned was named Thompson, had a problem. He'd been hired for a clean elimination that had turned into a chaotic murder scene with witnesses and evidence. "We need to discuss how to handle this situation," he said, holstering his weapon. "There's nothing to discuss. You're going to leave, and I'm going to call the police." I don't think you understand." "I understand perfectly. You were hired to commit a crime, the crime went wrong, and now Marcus is dead. The question is whether you want to be charged with murder or conspiracy to commit murder." Thompson stared at me for a long moment, clearly recalculating his options. "If I leave, what's your story?" "The truth. Marcus hired someone to kill me, there was a struggle, and he ended up shot. I'll testify that you tried to back out when you realized the situation was more complicated than Marcus had described. And the recordings will corroborate everything I just said." Thompson made his decision quickly. Professional criminals survive by knowing when to cut their losses. "I was never here," he said, moving toward the door. "You were never here," I agreed. After he left, I sat in Marcus's living room for 20 minutes, organizing my thoughts and my story. Then I called 911. 911, what's your emergency? My name is Caroline Roberts. I'm at 1425, Pine Street, apartment 4B. A man has been shot. I think he's dead. What followed were weeks of intense police investigation. Detective Sarah Morgan, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, led the inquiry with the thoroughness of someone who'd seen every possible variation of human deception. "Tell me again about the sequence of events," she said during our fourth interview. I'd told the story so many times it had taken on the weight of absolute truth. Marcus had called me, claiming he wanted to make amends. When I arrived at his apartment, I discovered he'd hired someone to kill me. In the struggle that followed, Marcus was shot. And you never saw the shooter's face clearly. It happened very quickly. Medium height, dark hair, professional demeanor. He seemed to realize that Marcus had misrepresented the situation and tried to leave. That's when Marcus grabbed for the gun. The beautiful thing about my story was that it was essentially true. I simply omitted certain details about my own role in orchestrating the confrontation and the extensive planning that had led to that moment. The recordings I'd made proved that Marcus had indeed hired someone to eliminate me. The evidence of his theft supported my claims about his desperation. Even Thompson's professional background, Detective Morgan's investigation revealed he was a known mercenary with ties to corporate espionage, corroborated my version of events. "Ms. Roberts," Detective Morgan said during our final interview, "I want you to know that we've found substantial evidence supporting your account. Mr. Vaughant's communications show he was under extreme pressure regarding the FDA investigation. His financial records show payment to intermediaries who likely arranged for professional services. Everything supports your description of what happened. I'm glad the truth is clear. There is one thing that bothers me, though." My chest tightened slightly. "What's that? How did you know to bring recording equipment to what was supposed to be a reconciliation meeting?" I'd prepared for this question. "Detective, Marcus had already stolen everything from me once. I've learned not to trust anyone without documentation." She nodded slowly. "Understandable. Given what he did to your company. Which brings me back to where I started, standing in Judge Morrison's courtroom, pleading guilty to a crime I'd orchestrated but didn't technically commit. You see, the investigation had cleared me of wrongdoing in Marcus's death. Self-defense, the district attorney had ruled. No charges filed. But I knew something the police didn't know. I knew that I had manipulated every element of that confrontation. I had driven Marcus to desperation, cornered him until violence seemed like his only option, and then used his desperation to justify his destruction. Legally, I was innocent. Morally, that was a much more complicated question. So when the opportunity arose to face a different kind of justice, I took it. 3 months after Marcus's death, the FBI investigation into Regenesis revealed everything I'd known it would. The timeline discrepancies, the impossible research progressions, the evidence of systematic intellectual property theft. Meridian Healthcare faced criminal fraud charges. Several executives, including Jonathan Hayes, were indicted for conspiracy. But here's the twist that made everything perfect. The investigation also revealed evidence of my systematic campaign to expose the fraud. The anonymous tips, the carefully orchestrated leaks, the methodical destruction of Marcus's credibility, all of it traceable back to me. The federal prosecutor, an ambitious woman named Lisa Chen, saw an opportunity to make a statement about corporate vengeance and vigilante justice. "Ms. Roberts," she said during our plea negotiation, "while we understand your motivations, your actions represent a dangerous precedent. Citizens cannot take the law into their own hands, even when they've been wronged." I exposed the truth about a fraudulent medical treatment. How is that taking the law into my own hands? You systematically destroyed a man's life and business through deceptive communications with federal agencies. That's a federal crime regardless of whether your underlying claims were true. The charges were creative: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, making false statements to federal agencies, and criminal harassment. The maximum sentence was 15 years. But Lisa Chen offered me a deal. Plead guilty to a single count of criminal conspiracy, accept a sentence of 2 years in federal prison, and use my case as an example of the importance of legal channels over personal vengeance. I could have fought it. My lawyers were confident we could win, especially given the public sympathy for my situation. The media had painted me as a brilliant scientist destroyed by corporate greed who'd fought back against impossible odds. But I said yes to the deal. Not because I was afraid of trial, but because I was tired of lying. So here's the question I want you to think about, and I really want you to comment with your thoughts. When the system fails you completely, when justice is denied and truth is buried under legal technicalities and corporate power, what do you do? Do you accept it? Do you move on and try to rebuild? Or do you fight back with whatever weapons you have, even if it means becoming something you never thought you could be? Because that's what this story is really about. Not corporate theft or pharmaceutical fraud or even murder. It's about the moment when you have to choose between who you were and who you need to become to survive. Standing in that courtroom, pleading guilty to conspiracy charges, I wasn't the woman who'd built Skyline Pharmaceuticals with hope and determination. I wasn't even the broken victim who'd lost everything to Marcus's betrayal. I was someone new. Someone harder and more dangerous, but also more honest about the world's true nature. Judge Morrison sentenced me to 18 months in federal prison with possibility of parole in 12. As the bailiff led me away in handcuffs, I saw Elena in the gallery, tears streaming down her face. She still loved the sister I used to be, but she was also afraid of the woman I'd become. I don't blame her for that fear. I'm afraid of me too, sometimes. Prison is a strange place for someone like me. Most of the women here are from worlds I never knew existed. Poverty, addiction, violence that shaped their lives from childhood. I'm an oddity, a white-collar criminal with advanced degrees who killed someone without technically committing murder. But prison has given me something I hadn't expected: perspective. I spend my days in the library, reading about other cases of corporate fraud and personal vengeance. I've learned that my story isn't unique. Brilliant people destroyed by betrayal, seeking justice through increasingly desperate means. What strikes me is how rarely these stories end with satisfaction. The revenge rarely delivers what it promises. The justice we take for ourselves tastes different from the justice we receive from others. Marcus is dead, but David is still gone. Elena still looks at me with fear mixed with love. The 12 years I spent building Skyline are still lost. Reemgen will eventually reach market. The FDA approved a modified version 6 months ago, but it will take years to undo the damage Marcus's theft caused to the approval process. The patients who needed that treatment immediately, some of them are dead now. Collateral damage in a war between two people who claimed to care about saving lives. I receive letters from people who've heard my story. Some call me a hero, a woman who fought back against a system designed to protect the powerful at the expense of the innocent. Others call me a murderer who used the law as a weapon to destroy a man whose only crime was ambition. Both groups are right, in their own ways. But the letters that affect me most are from other scientists, other inventors, other people who've had their life's work stolen by those they trusted. They want to know how I did it. How I found the strength to fight back. How I made the system work for me instead of against me. I try to answer honestly. I tell them that strength isn't the right word for what I found. Desperation is more accurate. When you lose everything that defines you, you discover capabilities you never knew you had. But you also discover that using those capabilities changes you in ways you can't predict or control. The woman who walks out of this prison in 6 months will be different from the one who walked in. Just as the woman who walked in was different from the one who built Skyline Pharmaceuticals. We are all shaped by the choices we make and the prices we pay for those choices. Late at night, lying on a narrow bunk in a cell that smells of industrial disinfectant and broken dreams, I ask myself the question that will define the rest of my life. If I could go back, knowing everything I know now, would I make the same choices? Would I still systematically destroy Marcus's life? Would I still manipulate him into that final confrontation? Would I still watch him die without calling for help? The honest answer terrifies me: yes. Not because I enjoyed it. Not because I felt satisfaction watching him suffer. But because the alternative, accepting injustice, allowing theft to be rewarded, letting the system's failures define my future, was worse than becoming someone I didn't recognize. Marcus made his choice when he decided to steal my research. I made mine when I decided to steal his life in return. The only difference is that my choice was informed by his betrayal, while his choice created that betrayal. 3 months before my release, Elena visited me for the first time since the sentencing. She looked older, worn down by the weight of having a sister in federal prison for orchestrating a murder. "How are you doing?" she asked, the question loaded with meanings we both understood. "I'm surviving." Are you still you?" I considered the question carefully. "I'm still Caroline Roberts. But I'm not the same Caroline Roberts who trusted Marcus Vaughn. Will you be able to come back from this? When you get out, I mean. Come back to what? My company is gone. My reputation is destroyed. David has moved on. I heard he's engaged to someone else. What exactly am I coming back to?" Elena leaned forward, her eyes intense. "You're coming back to being my sister. You're coming back to being someone who believes in something other than revenge. And if that person is gone, then I'll help you find her again." I walked out of Federal Correctional Institution Dublin on a Tuesday morning in March, carrying everything I owned in a single bag. Elena was waiting by the gate, looking nervous and hopeful. We drove back to Seattle in mostly comfortable silence, both of us unsure how to navigate this new relationship between who I was and who I'd become. "What will you do now?" she asked as we crossed the Bay Bridge. "I don't know. Start over, I suppose. Caroline, I need to tell you something. About Reem Jen." I looked at her, surprised. We'd avoided discussing anything related to my case during our prison visits. The FDA approved the treatment 8 months ago. It's been incredibly successful, even better results than the original trials suggested. But there's something else. She pulled off the highway into a rest stop, clearly needing to have this conversation without the distraction of driving. The patent disputes were resolved 6 months ago. Because Marcus's theft was proven, and because Meridian's involvement constituted fraud, all rights reverted to the original holder. Which is Skyline Pharmaceuticals. Which means they reverted to you. I stared at her, not comprehending. "Caroline, you own Reem Jen. The treatment is saving thousands of lives, and you own it. The royalties alone are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So here's the final twist in my story, the one that makes me question everything I thought I understood about justice and revenge. I got everything I wanted. Marcus is dead. His reputation is destroyed. Reem Jen is mine, saving lives and making me wealthy beyond anything I'd imagined when I started Skyline Pharmaceuticals. The medical community knows the truth about who developed the treatment. My name is associated with one of the most important cancer breakthroughs in decades. But I paid a price that makes victory taste like poison. I lost David, the man who loved the person I used to be. I lost Elena's unconditional trust and probably her respect. I lost the ability to feel proud of my achievements because they're built on a foundation of calculated revenge and orchestrated murder. Most importantly, I lost the person I was, someone who believed that doing the right thing mattered more than winning, someone who thought that justice would eventually prevail through proper channels. That woman is dead, killed as surely as Marcus was killed in his apartment. The difference is that I murdered her myself. Today, 2 years after my release from prison, I run the Caroline Roberts Foundation for Cancer Research. We fund treatments for patients who can't afford them, support research into rare cancers, and provide resources for families dealing with diagnosis and treatment. It's good work. Important work. Work that saves lives and reduces suffering. But I do it with blood on my hands. Every patient we help, every family we support, every breakthrough we fund, it's all paid for with money that came from destroying a man who betrayed me. I've turned Marcus's death into something positive, but that doesn't change how that money was earned. The media calls me a survivor, a woman who fought back against corporate injustice and won. Speaking engagements, book deals, documentary offers. Everyone wants to hear about the brilliant scientist who took down the man who stole her life's work. They don't want to hear about the nights I wake up seeing Marcus's eyes as he died. They don't want to know about the therapy sessions where I try to reconcile who I am now with who I thought I was. They don't want to understand that victory and justice aren't the same thing, and that getting what you want doesn't mean you'll want what you get. Which brings me to my final question for you, and I really hope you'll take time to think about this and share your thoughts in the comments. Is it possible to do the right thing for the wrong reasons? Or to do the wrong thing for the right reasons. Because that's what I live with every day. I exposed the truth about a fraudulent medical treatment that could have harmed thousands of patients. I brought a stolen research to market in a way that's helping save lives. I stopped a man who had shown he was willing to destroy anyone who got in his way. But I did it all through manipulation, deception, and orchestrated violence. I became someone I don't recognize to achieve goals I can't feel good about. The Foundation does important work, but it exists because I systematically destroyed a man's life. ReemGen saves cancer patients, but it reaches them through a path marked by betrayal and murder. Justice was served, but only after I took it into my own hands in ways that violated everything I once believed about right and wrong. I want you to think about that complexity as you navigate your own life, your own betrayals, your own moments when the system fails you and you have to decide who you're going to become in response. And if this story has made you think, if it's raised questions about justice and revenge and the price we pay for both, please let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more stories about the moments that define us and the choices that change us forever. Because ultimately, that's what this is about, not pharmaceutical fraud or corporate espionage, but the question of who we become when everything we believed about the world turns out to be wrong. My name is Caroline Roberts. I built a company that would have changed the world, had it stolen by someone I trusted, and got it back through methods that changed me in ways I'm still discovering. I did what I had to do. Whether that makes me a hero or a villain depends on how you define justice, and whether you believe some prices are worth paying for the right outcome. What would you have done? What would you do? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. Because the most important stories are the ones that make us question everything we think we know about right and wrong.